Detroit's South End didn't do mercy in February. Snow fell sideways, thin needles that stung your cheeks and made streetlights look blurry and far away. The kind of night where the city felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something bad to happen because it usually did. Elise Harper stood in the middle of a warehouse with her hands tied in front of her, wrists aching where the rope bit into skin. Her coat was too small for the cold. Her boots had a split along the sole. She could feel wetness creeping in, then numbness. Her father shoved her forward like she was a bag of trash he'd finally decided to take out. 27, he announced, loud enough to cut through the murmurs. Works hard, doesn't talk back, knows how to cook, clean, keep a place running. Men circled with slow steps. Cigarettes glowed like predators' eyes. Somebody laughed under their breath and the sound turned Elise's stomach. Then her father said the part he always saved for the end, like it was a bonus feature. And she can't have kids. Silence landed, heavy, interested. Elise didn't beg. She'd done that once, years ago, when her husband decided her body was a personal insult. When 3 years of trying turned into fists and shouting and a slammed door. When the word barren became something sharp enough to draw blood. She didn't beg now because she'd learned something brutal. Sometimes the moment you plead is the moment you become less than human. Near the entrance, her mother stood with her arms folded tight inside a worn coat, eyes fixed on the floor like she could disappear into it. She didn't speak. She didn't stop it. She only watched. The warehouse door creaked open. Cold air rushed in. Snow swirled inside like it had been invited. A man stepped through, broad-shouldered, dark coat dusted white, the collar hiding most of his face. He moved like the room belonged to him even though nobody had offered it. He didn't look Elise up and down the way the others did. He didn't ask what she could do. He simply reached into his coat, pulled out an envelope thick enough to look obscene, and slid it across the table. No bargaining, no questions. Everyone knew him. Because even in Detroit, there were names you didn't say unless you wanted trouble to find you. Her father's voice cracked. Mr. Varga. I didn't expect. The man's voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that made strong men swallow hard. How much? It's not her debt, her father rushed out. It's mine. I thought maybe. How much? A number was named. Dominic Varga didn't blink. He didn't even glance at Elise. He pushed the envelope forward. Debt is paid, he said. I don't want to see your face again. Then he turned toward the door. Elise didn't move. Not yet. Her brain couldn't catch up to what her eyes were seeing. Her father's hand struck her shoulder hard. Go on. You're his now. Outside, a black SUV waited with the engine running, exhaust curling into the falling snow. Elise climbed into the back seat like she was stepping into a different life without being allowed to read the contract. Dominic slid in across from her. Close enough that she could smell leather, winter air, and something metallic underneath. The driver glanced back. Where to, boss? Dominic's gaze stayed forward. Home. Elise forced words through a throat that felt frozen shut. Why did you pay for me? For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, flat and final, 4 kids. Elise stared. Dominic finally looked at her. Just once, eyes like dark glass. No mother, he added. No time. He leaned back as the SUV pulled into the night. You're not here to love me, he said. You're here to make sure my house doesn't rot from the inside. Elise swallowed. And if I say no? Dominic's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You won't. The mansion wasn't a castle. It was worse. A red brick giant tucked behind iron gates in a quiet suburb where the snow looked cleaner and the silence felt expensive. Warm light glowed behind the windows, but Elise didn't trust it. Warmth could be a trick. A baited hook. Dominic got out first and didn't wait for her. Elise followed anyway, her breath coming out in trembling clouds. The front door opened like the house had been expecting them. Heat rolled out. The smell of wood polish and something faintly sweet, cinnamon, maybe, wrapped around her like an almost hug. Dominic stopped in the entryway and spoke without turning. 2nd floor. End of hall. Your room. He took off his gloves slowly. Kitchen is yours. Laundry room is downstairs. Don't go into the basement. Then he disappeared into the shadows like a man who didn't intend to explain himself to anyone. Elise stood there with her satchel, one change of clothes, an old Bible she didn't read much anymore, and a locket she wore out of habit more than hope. A voice came from the staircase. Who is she? A boy stood at the top step, arms folded like a guard at a gate. 14. Sharp eyes. The kind of face that learned distrust early and got good at it. Behind him, another boy sat on the couch with a book open so wide it looked like it could swallow him. 11. Quiet. Watching without seeming to watch. In the corner, a little girl peeked from behind an armchair, clutching a frayed strip of fabric like it was oxygen. 8. Scared in a way that didn't make noise. Then a small tornado of a kid sprinted toward Elise and stopped inches away, head tilted back to stare at her with round, fearless eyes. 5 years old. He didn't flinch, didn't hide. He asked, like it was a normal question adults answered every day, "Are you my new mom?" Everything froze. The 14-year-old's jaw tightened. The boy with the book stopped turning pages. The little girl shrank further behind the chair. And somewhere deep inside the house, a door clicked shut softly, like Dominic had heard and chosen not to return. Elise crouched until she was eye level with the 5-year-old. "I'm not your mom," she said gently. His face fell so fast it hurt to watch. Elise felt something tighten behind her ribs. "But," she added, "I can be someone who stays. If you want." The boy blinked. "Like, stays? Elise nodded. Stays. He considered this like it was a serious business deal. Then he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her legs. "Okay," he decided. "I'm Benny." The oldest boy's voice cut in, sharp. "We don't need you." He turned and climbed the stairs hard enough to make the wood groan. A door slammed upstairs like a warning shot. Elise stood slowly, Benny still hugging her. The quiet boy with the book looked at her for a long second, then went back to reading as if ignoring people was a skill. The little girl behind the chair whispered something so soft Elise almost missed it. "She smells like hospitals." Elise's fingers went cold. Because she did. She used to be an EMT before life snapped her in half. Before she learned that saving strangers didn't mean you could save yourself. She looked toward the dark hallway where Dominic had vanished. 4 kids. No mother. No time. And now, somehow, no escape. Her room was small, clean, and prepared. A blanket folded tight at the foot of the bed. A glass of water by the lamp. A towel and soap laid out like somebody had planned her arrival. Elise sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at the ceiling until her eyes burned. Through the wall, she heard whispers. A boy's angry hiss. A little girl's muffled crying. The smallest one asking questions nobody answered. At midnight, the door creaked open. Benny stood there holding a pillow, eyelids heavy, lip trembling like he was trying not to be brave. "Miss Elise?" he whispered, as if he already knew her name belonged in his mouth. Elise sat up. "Hey, Benny." He shuffled forward. Do you know when Mom comes back?" The question was soft. The weight of it wasn't. Elise didn't have an answer. She didn't even know the woman's name yet. She only knew absence when she felt it. This whole house was built around it. She patted the bed. Benny climbed up without permission and curled against her like a kitten that had been cold too long. Elise didn't move for a while. She stared at the shadows on the wall, listening to his breathing even out. And she understood something with brutal clarity. These kids weren't waiting for a mother. They were waiting for the moment they finally accepted she was never coming. Elise's chest hurt, because she knew that feeling. In the morning, she went downstairs before sunrise and decided to do the one thing she could do without asking anyone's approval. Breakfast. Oats. Toast. Coffee. Simple. Her hands moved too fast. Anxiety makes you hurry, like speed can erase mistakes. The porridge burned. The toast charred. The coffee spilled across the table, hot and dark like a confession. By the time the kids appeared, the kitchen looked like failure had exploded. Benny climbed onto a chair, stared at the scorched porridge, and grinned like it was a treasure. "It's smoky," he announced happily, then ate like he'd been starved for something warm. The quiet boy, Theo, she learned when Benny shouted his name, took an apple from a bowl and retreated with his book. The little girl, Lila, didn't come in at all. Elise only saw her eyes from the hallway. And the oldest, Mason, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, expression carved from ice. Dominic's face lived in Mason's eyes. The same hardness. The same exhaustion. Mason took in the burnt food, the spill, the mess. Then he said, cold and precise, "Father bought someone who can't even use a stove." Elise swallowed the sting like she was used to swallowing worse. "Yeah," she said quietly, grabbing a cloth to clean the coffee. "Looks like it." Mason's gaze narrowed, like he'd been expecting excuses. Elise didn't give him any. She just cleaned. Because she'd learned another truth. Some people test you by trying to make you react. And the moment you do, they feel safer. That afternoon, Elise tried again. Soup this time. Potatoes. Carrots. A little meat. Slow heat. Careful stirring. The house stayed quiet in a way that felt staged. Like everyone was waiting for her to fail again so they could confirm what they already believed. When the soup was finally done, Elise carried the heavy pot toward the dining table. The floor was slick where she'd mopped earlier. Her foot slid. The pot crashed. Soup exploded across the wood, steaming, thick, everywhere. For one frozen second, Elise couldn't breathe. Her brain flashed images like lightning, a kitchen, a man, a fist, a scream, the sound of her own ribs cracking. She waited for it, the rage, the punishment, the humiliation. The kids stood like statues. Then the kitchen door opened. Dominic Varga walked in, Elise's whole body locked. He looked at the soup on the floor. Looked at the kids. Looked at Elise. Her hands trembled like she was waiting for a sentence. Dominic didn't raise his voice. He didn't even frown. He bent down, picked up the pot carefully, set it on the counter. Then he grabbed a towel. And he knelt. Right there in the wreckage, the most feared man in Detroit's underworld knelt like a normal person and started wiping soup off the floor. Elise stared, stunned. Dominic's voice was calm, almost bored. "Are you burned?" Elise swallowed hard. "No." He nodded once, finished wiping, stood up, and tossed the towel into the sink. "It's soup," he said simply. Then he walked out. No blame. No punishment. No cruelty. Elise stood there shaking, not from fear anymore. From the shock of kindness that didn't come with a price. That night, when the house fell asleep, Elise sat on her bed and cried into her pillow so quietly nobody would hear. Not because she was weak. Because she didn't know what to do with a world where mistakes didn't mean pain. At 2:13 a.m., Elise heard it. A thin, broken sound through the wall. Not a nightmare whimper. A fever cry. Elise was on her feet instantly. Lila's room. The little girl lay curled on the bed, cheeks flushed too bright, sweat soaking her hair, lips cracked. Elise pressed a hand to her forehead and flinched. Too hot. Dangerously. Elise sprinted down the hall and knocked once, hard, on Dominic's study door. It opened immediately, like he hadn't been sleeping at all. One look at Elise's face and Dominic's eyes changed. "What?" "Lila. Fever. Bad." Dominic was moving before she finished the sentence. He hit the stairs two at a time, Elise right behind him. When Dominic saw his daughter's face, the color drained from him like someone pulled a plug. He dropped to his knees beside the bed. His voice broke, just once. "Not again." Elise heard it. That wasn't about Lila only. That was about the woman who never came back. Dominic's hands shook as he touched Lila's hair. "She started like this," he whispered. "Fever." Then, he stopped, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it hurt. Elise didn't ask questions. She stepped forward and spoke with the calm of someone who'd worked emergencies. "I need a thermometer. Cool cloths. Ibuprofen if you have it. Water. Now." Dominic blinked, like he wasn't used to being ordered by anyone. Then he turned and ran. Elise went to work. Cool cloths to the forehead. Underarms. Back of neck. Tiny sips of water. No panic, no wasted movement. Her hands were steady like they belonged to someone else. Lila whimpered and turned her head away. Elise leaned close and sang softly. Not words. Just a melody, the kind you hum when language isn't enough. Outside the room, Dominic sat on the floor with his back to the wall like a man waiting for a verdict. Mason appeared in the hallway later, eyes wide and furious in the same breath. Theo hovered behind him clutching his book like a shield. Benny pressed his face to the door crack, whispering, Please, please, please. Elise stayed awake all night. Because she knew how fast fever could steal a child. And because she understood what was really at stake. If Lila slipped away, this house would never come back from it. Not Dominic. Not Mason. Not any of them. Near dawn, the fever finally began to break. Lila's breathing softened. Her skin cooled. Her eyes opened, heavy and glassy. She looked at Elise and whispered, voice rough. You sing, like her. Elise's throat tightened. She didn't turn around. But she felt Dominic standing in the doorway now, watching her like he was seeing something he didn't know existed. A woman who stayed. By morning, Elise looked like she'd been dragged through the night. But she still made breakfast. Not perfect, never perfect, but warm. Real. Benny hugged her waist as soon as she walked into the kitchen. Don't go. I'm not going, Elise promised, and surprised herself by meaning it. Mason watched from the doorway, jaw tight. The anger in him was still there, but it had shifted. Anger wasn't the only thing holding him up anymore. That week, the house changed in inches. Theo slid a book across the table toward Elise without looking at her. You can read it, if you want. Lila sat in the same room as Elise for the first time without hiding behind furniture, still clutching that strip of cloth, but not like it was a life raft anymore. More like a memory. Benny followed Elise everywhere, announcing her presence to rooms like she was important. Mason stayed distant, but he stopped slamming doors. Then one night, Elise went downstairs for water and found Dominic sitting at the kitchen table, alone, a glass untouched in front of him. His eyes were fixed on the window like he expected enemies to step out of the snow. He didn't look at her. You should sleep. I will, Elise said. Then, after a pause, eventually. Silence stretched. Then Dominic said, quietly, you're not like the others. Elise frowned. What others? The ones who want something, Dominic said. Money, safety, status, a piece of my name. Elise looked down at her hands. Scarred in small ways. Honest scars. Not the kind he wore. I don't have anything to want, she said. I just want a place where nobody throws me out. Dominic finally looked at her then, and his gaze wasn't cold. It was tired, like he'd been holding a whole world up alone and didn't know how to set it down. People don't get places like that, he said. Elise's voice was barely a whisper. They should. Dominic's fingers tightened around the glass. This house. It eats people. Elise met his eyes. Then let me be the one thing it doesn't chew up. Dominic stared at her for a long time. Then he slid the untouched glass away like he didn't need it anymore. The first real fracture came in the form of a scarf. A deep burgundy wool scarf, soft, old, carefully folded, appeared in Elise's hands when Dominic called her into his study one afternoon. This was hers, Dominic said, voice flat like he was forcing the words out. Their mother. Elise's breath caught. It wasn't a gift. It was a relic. Dominic set it in her palms anyway. Winter's not done. Elise's fingers trembled. I can't. You can, Dominic said, and the way he said it sounded like a decision he'd made with pain. Behind her, the door creaked. Mason stood there, eyes locked on the scarf like it was a knife. His face flushed red, then went pale. And then he turned and ran. Elise didn't think. She followed, out the back door, into the cold, past the shed, where she found Mason sitting on a crate with his face in his hands, shoulders shaking so hard he couldn't hide it. Elise sat beside him without touching. Minutes passed. Snow fell. Finally, Mason snapped, voice raw. Who do you think you are? Elise didn't flinch. You think you can replace her? You think you can wear her things like she didn't matter? Elise swallowed. I'm not trying to replace anyone. Then why are you here? Mason demanded. Why are you still here? Elise stared at the ground, at the snow gathering on her boots. Because my life taught me what it feels like to be unwanted, she said quietly. And your little brother looks at me like I'm a door he's terrified will close. Mason's breathing hitched. Elise continued, voice steady. I'm not your mother. I'm not even trying to be. I'm just someone who doesn't leave. Mason's shoulders trembled again. His voice cracked, smaller now. You saved Lila. Elise nodded once. I did what anyone should do. Mason's eyes stayed on the snow. Nobody does what they should. Elise waited. Then Mason whispered, almost inaudible, "Thank you." Elise didn't smile. She didn't make it big. She only nodded like she understood how expensive those 2 words were. When she stood to go back inside, Mason didn't stop her. And he didn't slam his door that night. That peace didn't last. It never did in Dominic Varga's world. One evening, Elise was watering the small plants she'd started in trays by the kitchen window. Tiny green beginnings she didn't know she needed. When headlights swept across the yard. The front door opened. Dominic stepped in. But not the Dominic she'd started to know. His knuckles were scraped raw. His collar was stained dark. He moved like a man who'd walked through violence and didn't bother wiping it off before coming home. A man followed him inside and muttered, "Doc, situation handled." Elise stood at the bottom of the stairs, heart hammering. Dominic looked up and saw her. He stopped like he expected her to run. Like he expected disgust. Like he expected the truth to finally cost him the only soft thing he'd let into his house. Elise didn't run. She walked into the kitchen, grabbed a clean cloth and warm water, and returned like this was the most normal thing in the world. She took Dominic's hand, and she wiped the dried blood from his knuckles, slow, careful, one streak at a time. Dominic's voice was hoarse. "You're not going to ask." Elise didn't look up. "Do you want me to?" "No." "Then I won't." Her hands kept moving. Dominic's fingers closed around her wrist gently, but firm enough to stop her. His eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. "I'm not a good man, Elise." Elise finally met his gaze. "I'm not looking for a good man," she said. "I'm looking for someone who isn't cruel." Dominic's jaw tightened. "My world is blood. Enemies. Threats." Elise's voice didn't shake. "I've lived in threats my whole life. Just different kinds." Dominic stared like he was trying to understand how someone could know what he was and still stand this close. Then he said the part that mattered. Soft. Almost afraid. "If you stay, they might come for you. For the kids." Elise felt her stomach turn. And still, she didn't step back. Because now she had something to lose. "Then we don't face it alone," she said. Outside, the wind hit the windows like a warning. And Elise understood. The real story wasn't about a man buying a woman. It was about what happens when a woman refuses to be bought, and chooses to stay anyway. The threat arrived on a Tuesday, dressed like nothing. Elise had the kids bundled in coats and scarves, shepherding them through a small winter market in town because Benny had been begging for the lights with the candy since dawn. Theo walked beside her with his book tucked under his arm like he didn't trust the world with both hands free. Lila stayed close enough that her sleeve brushed Elise's coat every few steps, quiet, watchful, trying not to look like she needed anyone. Mason lagged behind them, too old to hold hands, too young to stop scanning crowds like he was already a man. For the first time, they looked almost normal. Almost like a family. Elise stopped at a fruit stall to pick apples. Benny demanded the reddest ones. Lila wanted green. Theo didn't care. Mason kept his eyes up. That's why he saw the man first. A stranger slid in close, like he belonged near them. Too close. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The kind of smile that wasn't about joy. It was about control. He leaned down toward Elise, voice low, polite, deadly. "You're Varga's new house shadow." Elise's spine went rigid. She pulled Benny closer without making it obvious. The man's gaze flicked to the kids, one by one. Like he was counting them. "Tell your boss," he murmured, "that the docs aren't his." Elise didn't speak. Her throat had gone dry. The man's smile widened. "And if he forgets, we'll make sure those kids don't." Then he straightened, blended back into the crowd like he'd never been there, leaving the air colder than it had been. Elise didn't scream, didn't run. She did something worse. She went calm. The kind of calm you get when your life has taught you panic wastes time. "Home," Elise said, voice steady. "Now." Benny pouted. "But the home," Elise repeated, and there was steel under it. Mason moved immediately, stepping closer, positioning himself behind Theo and Lila like a shield. Theo looked up from his book for once. "What happened?" Elise didn't answer until they were inside the SUV Dominic's driver had brought, because Dominic never let them take a public cab. Only when the doors locked and the engine started did she let herself breathe. Her fingers were shaking. She hid it by tucking Lila's scarf tighter. When they got home, Elise sent the kids upstairs with a smile that hurt her face. Hot chocolate, she promised. 10 minutes. Benny cheered and ran. The moment the hallway swallowed them, Elise walked straight into Dominic's study without knocking. Dominic looked up from his desk. One glance at her expression and his face changed. What? Elise told him everything. Every word. Every detail. No drama, just facts. As she spoke, Dominic's jaw tightened, then tightened again until it looked like it might crack. When she finished, he stood so fast his chair scraped hard across the floor. He grabbed the whiskey glass on his desk and hurled it at the wall. Glass exploded like ice. Elise didn't flinch. Dominic's voice came out low, furious. Rourke. The name sounded like a curse. He dragged a hand down his face, then looked at Elise like the anger had nowhere safe to go. I'm sorry, he said, and the words didn't fit him. You shouldn't be here. Elise's pulse hammered. Dominic stepped closer, voice breaking into something raw. I can give you money. A new place. A new name. Anywhere. Tonight. You take the kids. Elise. The voice came from the doorway. Mason stood there, pale, eyes wide, listening. Dominic stopped like he'd been shot. Because Mason didn't call adults by their first names. Not ever. Elise turned slowly. Mason. Mason swallowed hard. Don't send her away. Dominic stared at his son, stunned. Mason's hands were clenched at his sides. His voice shook anyway. You said the house rots when people leave, he snapped at Dominic. Well, we already know what rot feels like. Silence cracked the room open. Dominic's gaze snapped back to Elise. He looked, afraid. Not of bullets. Of losing something he hadn't realized he'd started needing. Elise stepped forward and took Dominic's bleeding hand, the one he'd cut on glass, and wrapped it in her fingers. I chose to stay, she said quietly. And I'm still choosing it. Dominic's throat worked like he couldn't swallow. Then I have to end this, he murmured. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows. And Elise knew, deep in her bones. The next few days were going to decide whether this house became a home or a grave. That night, the mansion didn't sleep. Elise lay in bed staring at the ceiling while footsteps moved below, heavy, purposeful. Doors opening, voices low enough to be secrets. The kind of sounds that meant Dominic was building a storm. Around 1 a.m., Elise left her room and stood at the top of the stairs. Light leaked from beneath the study door. A voice inside said, Rourke won't stop at threats. Another answered, he wants fear. If we give it, he'll take more. Then Dominic's voice cut through, cold, controlled. No more warnings. Silence followed like a decision had been made. Elise stepped back, heart racing. She returned to her room and sat at the edge of the bed, hands clasped so tightly her fingers hurt. She could run. She could take the kids. She could disappear. But then she pictured Benny's face when he asked if she could stay. She pictured Lila falling asleep to her humming. She pictured Theo quietly sliding a book toward her like it was trust. And she pictured Mason, standing in the study doorway, begging his father not to send her away. Elise pressed a hand to her chest. No one had ever begged her to stay. Near midnight, there was a soft knock. Elise opened the door. Dominic stood there without his coat, without his hard mask, looking like a man who'd removed armor and didn't know what to do with his hands. I need to say something, he murmured. Elise stepped aside. Come in. Dominic walked to the window and stared out into the snow-dark yard like the night had teeth. If I don't come back, he began. Elise cut him off instantly. Don't. Dominic turned, tired eyes finding hers. You should be prepared. Elise walked up close. Close enough she could see the small bruise forming along his jaw from some earlier violence he didn't talk about. She wrapped her fingers around his wrist, gentle, firm. You promised, she said. Dominic blinked. I promised what? Elise swallowed, then forced the words out like she was daring the universe to hear them. You promised the house wouldn't rot. Dominic's jaw tightened again. Elise? You promised the kids wouldn't lose anyone else, she continued. And you promised me I wouldn't be thrown out. Dominic's eyes flickered, like she'd struck something soft inside him. Elise's voice dropped. And I promised Benny I'd stay. Dominic stared at her for a long time. Then something impossible happened. He smiled. Not the kind of smile you show strangers. A real one, brief, stunned, like he'd forgotten how. Elise Harper, he said quietly, you're reckless. Elise's lips trembled. So are you. Dominic stepped closer. His hand lifted, hesitated, then touched her cheek like she was something breakable. He didn't kiss her mouth. He kissed her forehead, slow, tender, a promise without words. Wait for me, he whispered. Elise held his gaze. I will, she said. But you're coming back. Dominic's eyes darkened with something that wasn't fear this time. It was determination. He nodded once, like an oath. Then he left. And Elise stood alone in her room, fingers pressed where his lips had been, feeling both comforted and terrified. Because the truth was simple, she could survive being unwanted. But she didn't know if she could survive being left behind. Morning came too bright. Dominic was gone before the kids woke. His driver avoided Elise's eyes when she asked where he went. Business, was all the man said, jaw clenched. Elise made breakfast anyway, because normal is what you cling to when the world tries to rip you apart. Benny ran downstairs first. Where's Dad? Elise smiled like it didn't hurt. Work. He'll be back. Mason watched her closely, like he was looking for cracks. Theo ate quietly. Lila kept tugging her sleeve. The day dragged like wet wool. Elise kept moving, cleaning, cooking, helping with schoolwork, because sitting still would make her imagine too much. By night, the house felt like a held breath. The kids were asleep. Elise sat in the living room with the burgundy scarf wrapped around her shoulders, staring out at the road. Every sound made her flinch. A branch snapping. A car far away. A dog barking. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to feel like mocking. 11:17, 12:03, 1:26. Elise's fingers clenched around the scarf. She didn't cry. Not yet. At 3:41 a.m., headlights swept across the window. Elise was on her feet instantly. A black SUV rolled into the drive. The door opened. Dominic stepped out, alive, but battered, one eye swelling, coat torn, his hand wrapped in bandages already stained through. Two men helped someone else out of the car behind him, worse off, but Elise barely registered it. Dominic moved toward the house one slow step at a time, like gravity had doubled. Elise opened the door before he reached it. They stared at each other in the cold doorway, snow dusting Dominic's shoulders like ash. Dominic's voice was rough. I'm home. Elise couldn't speak, so she did what she always did when words weren't enough. She took his uninjured hand and pulled him inside. Warmth hit his face. The house swallowed him. Elise guided him to the kitchen, sat him down, and grabbed supplies, warm water, antiseptic, clean gauze, moving like muscle memory. Dominic winced once when she cleaned a cut along his cheek, but he didn't pull away. He just watched her. You're not going to ask, Dominic murmured. Elise wrapped the bandage tighter. Did you win? Dominic's throat worked. Yes. Elise nodded once. That's all I need. She tied the knot and started to stand. Dominic caught her hand. Stay, he said, voice low. Elise looked at him, really looked. He wasn't asking for a nurse. He wasn't asking for help. He was asking not to be alone. So Elise sat back down. Dominic leaned forward slowly until his forehead rested against hers, and they stayed like that in silence. Two people who'd been broken in different ways, holding each other together. Upstairs, the house creaked. Footsteps. Benny's sleepy voice echoed down the hall. Miss Elise? Elise flinched, then smiled, wiping her eyes fast. Dominic straightened. Benny appeared in the kitchen doorway, pajama pants too long, hair a mess. He stared at Dominic like he was seeing a miracle. Dad? Benny breathed, then launched himself forward. Dominic caught him with his good arm, holding him tight. Mason appeared behind Benny, eyes red. Theo hovered. Lila clutched her cloth strip with both hands, trembling. Dominic looked at them all. Then looked at Elise. His voice came out thick. I'm done, he said quietly. Elise blinked. Done? Dominic nodded once. With the part of my life that brings this to my door. Elise didn't know if it was possible. But for the first time, she saw Dominic Varga wanting something that wasn't power. Peace. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It came in stubborn little proofs. A patch of grass showing through melted snow. A drip from the gutter. A bird daring to sing in a world that still looked like winter. Elise started a small garden behind the house, not because she was trying to copy someone else's memory, but because she needed something alive to pour herself into. She found old seed packets in a drawer near the mudroom, handwriting faded on the paper. She didn't ask whose it was. She just planted anyway. The kids helped. Benny dug holes like he was building treasure pits. Lila placed seeds carefully, tongue sticking out in concentration. Theo read instructions aloud from a gardening book, serious as a scientist. Mason pretended he wasn't interested, but Elise caught him repairing the broken fence line without being asked. Dominic watched from the porch more than he spoke. Sometimes he held coffee. Sometimes he held nothing. Always he held the same quiet heaviness in his gaze. One morning, Elise stepped outside and froze. Overnight, a late frost had come through like a thief. Half the seedlings were wilted, darkened, collapsed. Elise sank to her knees in the damp soil. For a moment, all she could hear was the echo of old words. You fail. You ruin things. You don't deserve good. Benny ran out, stopped short, eyes wide. Miss Elise, did they die? Elise couldn't answer. Her throat tightened so hard it felt like it might close. Footsteps behind her. Dominic came down from the porch and knelt beside her like he'd done in the soup mess. He didn't tell her to toughen up. He didn't say it didn't matter. He picked up one tiny plant that was still green, bent, fragile, but alive, and held it out. Some are still here, Dominic said softly. Elise's eyes stung. It's not enough, she whispered. I tried so hard. Dominic looked at her, steady. Even one is enough, he said. Elise swallowed. Dominic's voice lowered. You taught me that. Elise turned her face toward him. Dominic nodded toward the house, toward the kids watching from the doorway. One night, he said, you stayed awake and saved my daughter. One person changed everything in this house. Elise's breath shook. Dominic pressed the little plant into her palm like it was sacred. One plant can change a whole garden, he finished. Elise stared at the fragile green life in her hand. And something inside her unclenched. She stood up slowly. Okay, she whispered. We start again. Benny cheered like it was a game. Lila moved closer and quietly took Elise's hand. Theo nodded like he'd expected this outcome. Mason didn't say anything, but he stayed outside, working beside her until the sun went down. And Dominic watched, something unreadable in his eyes. Because the truth was becoming undeniable. Elise wasn't just fixing a garden. She was rebuilding a family. The next threat didn't come with a warning. It came dressed as a gift. 3 days after Dominic returned bruised and breathing, a florist van rolled up the driveway in the afternoon snowmelt. Elise saw it through the kitchen window while she was rinsing carrots for dinner. The driver carried a massive arrangement, white lilies and red roses, too expensive, too polished, too wrong. He knocked. Elise opened the door just enough to keep the chain on. Delivery for Mr. Varga, the man said, eyes down like he didn't want to be part of the story. Elise didn't like how he avoided her face. Leave it, she said. Needs a signature. Elise hesitated. Then, careful, she unlatched the chain and signed without giving him her full name. The moment the door shut, she stared at the flowers like they were a snake. Benny appeared at her side, eyes huge. Pretty. No touching, Elise said quickly, a little sharper than she meant. Benny froze. Elise forced a smile and softened. Just wait, okay? She lifted the arrangement, heavy as guilt, and carried it toward the kitchen. Halfway there, Lila gasped. Elise, it's wet. Elise looked down. A thin, dark drip slid from the base of the vase onto her hand. Not water. A metallic smell hit her nose. Blood. Elise's heart slammed against her ribs. She set the flowers down hard on the table and stepped back like they could explode. Theo, quiet Theo, was suddenly behind her, book forgotten, eyes fixed on the arrangement like he'd memorized every danger sign the world ever made. There's something inside, he whispered. Mason appeared in the doorway like he'd been summoned, jaw set. Elise didn't reach forward, not with her hands. She grabbed a kitchen knife, slid it under the ribbon, and cut it carefully. A card fell out. The handwriting was neat, mocking. For the woman WHO thinks she can plant roots in someone else's life. Elise's fingers went cold. Mason's voice was tight. Who sent it? Elise didn't answer. She couldn't. Because under the card, wrapped in plastic, was a small object that stole her breath. A child's mitten. Tiny. Blue. Benny's. Elise's vision tunneled. Benny lifted his hands, confused. I still have mine. Elise turned so fast she almost stumbled. She rushed to the coat hooks by the door. Benny's mittens were there, both of them. Safe. So why? Elise's stomach twisted. This wasn't a stolen mitten. It was a message. I can touch your children whenever I want. Elise moved like a machine. Upstairs, she said, voice calm but unrecognizable. All of you. Now. Benny pouted. But dinner. Now. Mason snapped, and Benny flinched and ran. Theo followed, silent. Lila clutched her cloth strip and hurried up after them, glancing back at Elise like she wanted to carry her too. When they were gone, Elise locked every door, every window, every latch she could reach. Then she walked into Dominic's study and didn't bother knocking. Dominic looked up, one glance at the flowers in her arms, at the blood on her fingers, and his face went dead. What did he do? Elise held out the card without a word. Dominic read it. His eyes didn't widen. They emptied. The temperature in the room dropped. Elise could feel it. Dominic's voice came out low and lethal. Rourke wants to prove I can't protect my own house. Elise swallowed hard. Can you? Dominic's gaze snapped to her, sharp, pained. I can, he said. Then, quieter, like it cost him. But not if you keep standing in the open. Elise's hands shook. I'm not the open. The kids are. Dominic stood and walked around his desk like a storm given a body. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the tiny cut on his lip, still healing. I'm moving you, he said. Tonight. Elise's breath hitched. Where? Dominic's jaw tightened. Somewhere nobody knows. Elise stared. No. You can't just. I can, Dominic snapped, then softened instantly, as if anger toward her tasted wrong. Elise, please. The word didn't belong in his mouth. Please. Elise felt her chest tighten. Because she heard what he wasn't saying. I'm scared. Elise nodded once. Okay, she whispered. But I'm not leaving the kid's side. Dominic's eyes held hers. Neither am I, he said. And Elise believed him, because for the first time, his fear wasn't about losing power. It was about losing them. They left the mansion after midnight. Not with suitcases and obvious tears. Dominic didn't allow drama on the surface. Elise packed quietly. Clothes, Benny's favorite toy truck, Theo's book, Lila's cloth strip, Mason's spare hoodie. She moved like someone trained to evacuate a disaster zone. The kids didn't ask questions. Not really. Benny whispered, Are we going on an adventure? Elise kissed his hair. Something like that. Theo didn't speak at all, but his fingers tightened around his book until his knuckles went white. Lila kept glancing at the windows, like she expected shadows to press their faces to the glass. Mason stayed close to Elise, jaw set, eyes hard. When the SUVs rolled out, it didn't feel like leaving home. It felt like running from a fire you couldn't see. The safe house was smaller, quiet, a plain brick place tucked behind an auto shop on the edge of the city. Somewhere boring enough to be invisible. Dominic's men swept it first. Checked corners, windows, basement. When they finally let the kids inside, Benny ran from room to room like it was a game. Lila sat on the couch and held her cloth strip like an anchor. Theo went straight to a chair and opened his book like reading could build a wall. Mason stood by the front door, watching Dominic's men like he didn't trust anyone. Elise found Dominic alone in the kitchen, leaning on the counter like the weight of his choices had finally landed. You didn't have to do this, Elise said quietly. Dominic didn't look up. Yes, I did. Elise stepped closer. Because of me? Dominic exhaled, slow. Because of them, he said, voice rough. But you made me care in a way that's dangerous. Elise's throat tightened. Caring isn't dangerous. Dominic finally looked at her, eyes dark. In my world, it is. Elise stared back, refusing to shrink. Then change your world. Dominic's lips pressed into a line. You don't understand what I am. Elise's voice didn't waver. I understand what you were in that warehouse. Dominic flinched slightly. Elise stepped closer. You didn't ask my name. You didn't touch me. You didn't bargain. You didn't make me perform for my safety. Dominic's jaw worked. Elise continued, softer now. You paid the debt and told my father to disappear. You could have left me on the street after that. But you didn't. Dominic's voice was almost a whisper. I didn't plan you. Elise's eyes burned. That's the point. I wasn't part of your calculation. Dominic looked like he wanted to argue. Like he wanted to push her away before she became a wound. But then a small sound came from the hallway. Benny. He stood there holding his toy truck, eyes sleepy. Dad? He asked softly, voice small as a prayer. Are the bad guys coming here too? Dominic froze. Elise felt something sharp slice through her chest. Dominic walked toward Benny slowly, like he was afraid the wrong step would break the moment. He crouched in front of him. No, Dominic said, and there was no uncertainty in the word. Not here, not to you. Benny's eyes filled with tears anyway. Promise? Dominic's throat worked. Then he did something Elise had never seen him do. He placed a hand over his own heart. I swear, he said. Benny stared like the vow was something holy. Then he nodded, satisfied, and climbed into Dominic's arms. Dominic held him tight. Elise turned away, blinking hard. Because she'd seen violence carve Dominic's face into stone. But this was love. And love, Elise knew, made people brave. It also made them targets. The next morning, Elise woke to the sound of Dominic's voice on the phone. Low, controlled, but underneath, rage. Elise stood at the hallway corner, listening without meaning to. You had one job, Dominic said. One. A pause. Then Dominic's voice turned colder than the snow outside. Find him. He hung up and turned. And saw Elise. For a second, he looked like he'd been caught with something vulnerable in his hands. What happened? Elise asked. Dominic stared at her like the answer tasted bitter. Rourke didn't send the flowers, he said. Elise's stomach dropped. Then who? Dominic's eyes narrowed. Someone inside my circle. The words landed like a gunshot. Elise felt her blood chill. A traitor meant this wasn't about territory anymore. It was personal. It meant someone had been watching the kids in their own house. Someone had known what Benny liked. What Lila clutched. What Theo read. Elise's hands trembled. Dominic stepped closer, voice low. I'm ending this today. Elise swallowed. Dominic. I know, he snapped, then softened instantly. I know you'll say don't go. But this doesn't stop until I cut the root. Elise's voice shook. And if you don't come back? Dominic's gaze held hers, heavy. You keep them safe. Elise's throat tightened. That's not an answer. Dominic's jaw flexed. Then, quietly, he said, if I don't come back, Mason knows where the papers are. Theo knows the safe code. Lila, stop, Elise whispered, tears stinging. Stop talking like you're already dead. Dominic stepped closer until he was right in front of her. He didn't touch her cheek this time. He took both her hands. His grip was warm, solid, real. Elise, he said, and the way he said her name was different now. Not a label, not a role, a truth. You made this house worth coming home to. Elise's lips trembled. Then come home. Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. I will, he said. Or I'll die trying. Elise hated the words. But she believed them. Because the look in Dominic's eyes wasn't the look of a boss going to war. It was the look of a father going to protect. They didn't wait long. Dominic left before noon, taking 3 men and a silence that followed him like a shadow. Elise stayed behind with the kids, forcing normal. Lunch. Homework. A movie for Benny. Reading time for Theo. Braiding Lila's hair. Mason didn't watch the movie. He watched the windows. Elise tried not to look at the clock. Every minute that passed made her mind build 1,000 terrible endings. In the late afternoon, a knock hit the door. Elise's whole body locked. Mason moved first, too fast, too ready, stepping between Elise and the door. Stay back, he whispered. Elise nodded and reached for the kitchen knife on the counter. The knock came again. Elise, a voice called from outside. It's me. Her lungs released in a broken breath. Dominic's driver. Elise unlocked the door carefully. The driver stepped in, face pale. Boss says you need to leave. Now. Elise's heart hammered. What happened? The driver swallowed. He found the traitor. It was someone close. And Rourke's moving tonight. Elise's hands shook. Mason's voice was sharp. Is my dad alive? The driver hesitated. That hesitation was enough to make Elise feel like the floor tilted. Elise forced her voice to stay calm. Where do we go? The driver looked at her. There's a cabin up north. No signal. Nobody knows it. Elise grabbed her bag. Kids, coats. Now. Benny whined. Why? Elise knelt and cupped his cheeks. Because we're going to be safe. That's all that matters. Lila clutched her cloth strip and nodded like she understood more than she should. Theo shut his book carefully like he was closing a chapter of his life. Mason didn't move until Elise moved, then he followed close, jaw clenched. They got into the SUV. The driver started the engine. As the car rolled out, Elise looked back at the city. The sky was turning the color of bruises. Elise pressed her forehead to the cold glass and whispered a prayer she didn't know she still believed in. Bring him back, because if Dominic didn't come back, she wasn't just losing a man. She was losing the first place that had ever felt like a choice. The cabin wasn't cozy. It was quiet in a way that made Elise's skin prickle. Pine trees pressed in on all sides, tall and black against a sky the color of cold steel. Snow was packed hard on the ground, glittering under the SUV's headlights like broken glass. The driver killed the engine, and suddenly the world went silent. No traffic hum, no distant sirens, no city breath. Just wind, and the sound of Benny's small sniffle in the back seat. We're here, the driver said, voice too tight. Elise stepped out first, scanning the darkness. The cabin was older than she expected, wooden, low, with one porch light that flickered like it was struggling to stay alive. Theo clutched his book. Lila wrapped both hands around her cloth strip. Mason stood close to Elise, posture rigid, eyes sharp. Benny whispered, Is Dad coming? Elise forced a smile that felt like holding up a collapsing roof. Yes. Inside, the cabin smelled like old smoke and dust, but it was warm. There were blankets already stacked on the couch, a small pantry stocked with basics. Someone had prepared this place, just in case. That thought didn't comfort Elise. It scared her, because it meant Dominic had been planning for the worst longer than she realized. They settled the kids in the living room. Benny fell asleep first, curled under a blanket with his toy truck tucked into his chest. Theo sat in an armchair, book open, but his eyes weren't reading. Lila sat close to Elise's side like a shadow that didn't want to detach. Mason stood by the only window, watching the tree line. Elise tried calling Dominic. No signal. She tried again. Nothing. Her heartbeat got louder. The driver, Cal, kept pacing near the kitchen, rubbing his hands together like he couldn't wash something off. Elise watched him for a long moment, then said quietly, Tell me the truth. Cal stopped. Elise's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Is Dominic alive? Cal's eyes flickered away. That was answer enough. Elise felt the room tilt, but she forced her knees to lock. Cal swallowed. He walked into it. He said he had to. He said if he didn't end it now, it would never end. Elise's throat tightened. What did he find? Cal hesitated. Mason turned slowly from the window. Say it. Cal looked between Elise and Mason, like he knew the name would cut. It was Victor, he admitted. Elise blinked. Victor? Cal's voice went brittle. Dominic's right hand. The man who's been in his house for 10 years. Elise felt ice crawl up her spine. Victor was the one who always stood half in shadow. The one who called Dominic, boss, like it meant loyalty. Cal's jaw clenched. Victor's been feeding Rourke information for months. Schedules, routes, weak points. Elise's mind flashed to the flowers. The mitten, the message. Someone had been inside the house. Someone had been watching her become a mother. Lila's quiet voice broke the silence. That's why Mom didn't come back, she whispered, barely audible. Elise's breath caught. Everyone froze. Elise looked down at Lila. What, sweetheart? Lila stared at her cloth strip like it could speak. I heard Dad yelling once. A long time ago. He said, Victor, let it happen. Elise's skin went cold. Cal's face went pale. Mason's hands curled into fists so tight his knuckles whitened. Elise swallowed hard, forcing calm through panic. Dominic is ending it, she said, mostly to herself. He has to. Mason's voice was low, furious. And if he doesn't come back? Elise looked at the kids, sleeping Benny, silent Theo, trembling Lila, raging Mason. And she realized the truth. If Dominic didn't come back, Rourke wouldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. This wasn't a feud anymore. It was a hunt. Night deepened. The cabin creaked with wind pressure. The porch light flickered and died, plunging the outside into darkness so thick it felt solid. Elise kept the inside lamps on. Not because light could stop bullets. Because light could stop fear from swallowing children whole. Theo finally closed his book. If Victor betrayed him, he whispered, then Victor knows we're here. Cal snapped, no. This place is off-grid. Only Dominic knew. Mason's eyes stayed on Cal. Only Dominic, Mason repeated, like tasting the lie. Elise's stomach tightened. She hadn't wanted to think it, but now it screamed in her mind. If Victor knew everything, he could know this too. Lila pressed into Elise's side. Elise, I don't like this. I know, Elise whispered. I'm here. A sound outside. Soft. Crunching. Snow under a boot. Mason's head snapped toward the window. Cal's hand went under his jacket. Elise's blood turned to ice. Another crunch. Closer. Elise moved fast without making noise. She guided Benny, still asleep, into the small bedroom and tucked him deeper under blankets. Theo followed without being told, eyes wide. Lila clung to Elise's sleeve. Mason stayed near the living room doorway, body tense like a wire about to snap. Cal whispered, stay down. Elise's hands shook as she grabbed the kitchen knife again. It felt ridiculous. A knife against whatever came with boots in the snow. A shadow passed the window. Then a knock, slow, deliberate, hit the cabin door. 1, 2, 3. Elise's heart hammered so loud she thought it might give them away. A voice drifted through the wood. Open up. The accent was city, familiar in the worst way. Cal's face went tight. Rourke. Mason inhaled sharply. Elise's mouth went dry. The voice continued, almost amused. I know you're in there. I know the kids are with you. You got a lot of courage for a woman who used to take orders. Elise's grip tightened on the knife. Open the door, Rourke called. Or I'll burn this place down and take what's left. Lila made a small sound in her throat. Elise crouched in front of her, cupping her cheeks. Look at me, Elise whispered. Breathe with me. You're okay. You're okay. Lila's eyes were wide, but she nodded. Mason moved toward the door. Elise caught his sleeve. No. Mason's voice shook with anger. He won't stop. Elise's gaze locked onto Mason's, steady. Then we don't give him what he wants. Cal whispered harshly, there's a back window. We can run. Rourke laughed outside, as if he could hear the plan forming. You're thinking about running, aren't you? He called. Go ahead. I like it better when prey runs. Elise's chest tightened. This wasn't a standoff. It was a trap. And then, a sound cut through the night. Not close. Farther down the road. An engine. Another. Multiple vehicles. Rourke went silent. The crunching outside stopped. Cal's eyes widened. Mason whispered, Dad? Elise didn't breathe. Headlights swept through the trees, bright, moving fast. Then a voice shouted from outside, not Rourke's. Drop it. Hands where I can see them. Chaos erupted in sound. Boots moving. A brief shout, then the unmistakable slam of a body hitting snow. Elise pulled the kids back, protecting them with her own body. The door banged open. A man stumbled inside. Dominic. Alive. Breathing hard. Face bruised. Coat dusted in snow. His eyes locked on Elise like he'd been searching for her in the dark for 1,000 years. Elise's knees nearly buckled. Dominic's voice came out rough, urgent. Are they safe? Elise nodded, tears burning her eyes. We're here, she whispered. We're here. Dominic exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since Detroit. But then his gaze hardened. Because behind him, outside, the storm wasn't over. It was just changing shape. Dominic shut the cabin door and leaned his forehead against it for a second, just one breath, then straightened like a man forcing himself back into armor. He looked at Cal. Where is he? Cal's face was pale. Outside. He came alone. Dominic's mouth tightened. He never comes alone. Elise stepped closer, voice trembling. Dominic, Victor? Dominic's eyes flickered, and Elise saw pain flash through them, sharp, quick, buried. Handled, he said. Elise froze. Handled how? Dominic's jaw worked. He made his choice. That was all he gave her. Because some truths were too heavy to place in the hands of children sleeping in the next room. Mason stepped forward, voice raw. Did you win? Dominic looked at his son for a long moment. Then he nodded once. We're still standing. That was Dominic's version of yes. Theo whispered, he said he'd burn the cabin. Dominic's gaze snapped to Elise. He spoke to you? Elise nodded, throat tight. He wanted me to open the door. Dominic's hands clenched. For a second, Elise thought Dominic might storm outside and end it with brute force. But then Dominic did something Elise didn't expect. He looked at her, not at Cal, not at Mason, at her. His voice dropped. Elise, he said, and it wasn't a command. It was a confession. I can fight him. I can kill him. But that won't end what he started. Elise swallowed. Then what ends it? Dominic's gaze held hers, steady and dark. Exposure, he said. Elise blinked. What? Dominic stepped closer, lowering his voice further. Rourke survives because everyone's afraid. He lives in shadows. So does my name. So do my sins. Elise felt the air change. Dominic looked like a man choosing between two deaths. I'm done hiding, he said. Elise stared. Dominic, your world. My world already came to my children. Dominic cut in. It already touched you. It already threatened Benny with a mitten in a vase of blood. Elise flinched. Dominic's jaw tightened, eyes burning. I'm not letting them grow up thinking fear is normal. Mason's throat worked. Theo watched like he couldn't decide if he was hearing a miracle or a lie. Dominic turned slightly, eyes finding the kids' faces. Then he said the words that changed everything. Tonight, we end this without more bodies. Cal stared. Boss. Dominic's gaze snapped to Cal like a blade. No more. Elise stepped closer. How? Dominic's voice turned cold, precise. Rourke wants leverage, he said. So we take it away. He nodded toward Elise. He thinks you're my weakness, Dominic said. Elise's stomach dropped. Dominic. Dominic's eyes held hers, intense, pleading without saying please. We use that, he said. We let him think he has you, and then we trap him where he can't slither out. Elise's blood ran cold. You're asking me to be bait. Dominic didn't deny it. He just stepped closer until he was right in front of her. His voice broke a little. I wouldn't ask if there was another way, he whispered. But you're the only thing he can't stop thinking about, because you're the only thing I changed for. Elise's chest hurt. She looked toward the bedroom where Benny slept. Toward Theo's trembling hands. Toward Lila's wide eyes. Toward Mason's rage. And she understood the truth. This wasn't about Dominic's pride. It was about the kid's future. Elise lifted her chin. Okay, she said. Dominic's eyes widened slightly. Elise's voice didn't shake now. But we do it my way. Dominic stared. Your way? Elise's gaze was steady. No more shadows, she said. No more secrets. No more making children live in fear while men settle scores. Dominic's jaw tightened. Elise stepped closer, almost touching him. If I'm the bait, she said softly, then the trap has to end the whole cycle. Not just this man. Dominic looked at her like he was seeing who she truly was. Not a woman bought. Not a woman saved. A woman who could lead. Dominic nodded slowly. Tell me, he said. Elise inhaled. We make him come to a place where witnesses exist, she said. We record everything. We make it so he can't threaten us from the dark ever again. Dominic's eyes narrowed. That's dangerous. Elise's voice was quiet, absolute. So is living like this. They waited until dawn. Not because dawn was safe, but because dawn made visibility harder to twist. Elise sat at the kitchen table in the cabin. Hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea she hadn't drunk. Dominic sat across from her, forearms on the table, eyes fixed on her face like he was memorizing it. Mason slept in a chair with a jacket over his chest, but his fist stayed clenched even in sleep. Theo dozed with his book open on his lap, like he was afraid to let go of it. Lila curled on the couch beside Benny, one small hand still gripping her cloth strip. Cal stood near the window, phone in hand, waiting for the first bar of signal to flicker. When the sun finally began to lift, a weak signal appeared, 1 bar, then 2. Dominic made a call, not to his men, not to another boss, to someone Elise didn't expect. A lawyer, a woman with a voice like steel wrapped in silk. Dominic spoke to her in a low murmur, then handed the phone to Elise. Elise Harper, the woman said. I'm Mara Quinn. Dominic says you're the reason he wants out. Elise swallowed. He wants protection for the kids. Mara's tone sharpened with focus. Then we do this right. You get Rourke talking. You get him admitting what he did. Threats, names, dates. The more you say, the more he answers. You understand? Elise's throat tightened. I do. Dominic watched her like he wanted to pull her away from the plan and keep her wrapped in a blanket forever. But he didn't, because he knew what it cost. Elise ended the call and set the phone down. Dominic leaned in slightly. You don't have to be brave for me. Elise's lips trembled. I'm not doing this for you. Dominic's eyes flickered. Elise nodded toward the kids. I'm doing it for them, she whispered. So Benny can go to a market and see lights without learning what fear tastes like. Dominic's jaw clenched. Elise continued, voice steadier now. So Mason can stop thinking he has to be a weapon to keep people safe. Mason's eyelids fluttered as if he heard, even asleep. Elise's gaze softened. So Theo can read without using a book as armor. Theo's fingers loosened slightly on the pages. Elise looked at Lila, small and curled, clutching her cloth strip like a memory. And so Lila can let go of the past without someone threatening to steal her future. Dominic stared at Elise like she'd spoken the only language he trusted. Truth. He reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was gentle this time. You change everything you touch, he whispered. Elise's eyes burned. Then let me change this. Outside, wind moved through the trees. The world felt paused, like it knew something final was about to happen. Cal's phone buzzed. He looked up, face tight. Rourke's moving. He's making calls. He thinks you're scared. Dominic's gaze turned to stone. Elise inhaled. Good, she said quietly. Let him think that. She stood. Dominic stood too, instantly, like he couldn't let her be upright alone. Elise turned to him, voice soft but firm. When we do this, she said, we do it in the light. Dominic held her gaze. Then he nodded once. In the light, he agreed. And Elise knew the story had crossed the line between survival and payoff. Because the woman who had once stood in a warehouse with her wrists bound was about to decide how this ends. They chose the market. The same winter market where Rourke had first leaned too close and whispered threats into Elise's ear. It was public. It had cameras. It had families and vendors and noise. It had witnesses. Elise stood in front of the cabin mirror while dawn stretched pale across the sky. She wore a simple coat. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that screamed danger. Dominic watched from the doorway. I don't like this, he said quietly. Elise met his reflection. You don't have to like it. His jaw tightened. If anything goes wrong, it won't, she said, and forced herself to believe it. Dominic stepped closer. Elise, if he touches you. He won't, she repeated. Then softer, because this time, I'm not alone in a warehouse. Dominic's expression shifted at that. He moved in front of her and placed both hands on her shoulders, steadying her. I never asked your name that night, he said. Elise swallowed. No. Dominic's voice dropped. Say it. Elise Harper. Dominic nodded slowly. Elise Harper doesn't get sold again. Elise's breath trembled, but she smiled. Good, she whispered. Because she's not for sale. They arrived separately. Dominic stayed out of sight, positioned with Cal and 2 discreet allies nearby. Cameras were already rolling. Phones placed strategically. One hidden inside Elise's coat pocket transmitting audio directly to Mara Quinn and a federal contact who had been waiting years for Rourke to slip. Elise walked through the market alone. The lights hung overhead like fragile stars. Vendors called out prices. Children laughed. It felt almost cruel that something so dangerous could hide inside something so ordinary. Elise stopped at the same fruit stall as before. She didn't have to wait long. Rourke stepped beside her like he'd been summoned by instinct. "You're braver than I thought," he said lightly. Elise didn't turn to look at him. "You followed me," she replied calmly. Rourke chuckled. "You think I need to follow you?" He leaned in closer. "You're predictable. You're soft. You care too much." Elise finally looked at him. "You threatened children," she said. Rourke's smile sharpened. "I threaten leverage." There it was. Elise's pulse thudded, but she stayed still. "You killed his wife," she said quietly. Rourke's eyes flickered. "Careful," he warned. "Elise," he said mockingly, "you don't know what you're talking about." "Victor let it happen," she continued. "You arranged it." Rourke's smile thinned. "Dominic always was sentimental," Rourke said. "He let her go somewhere she shouldn't have been." Elise swallowed. "You arranged it." Rourke tilted his head. "She was in the way." The words landed like a bullet. Elise's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "And the flowers?" she asked. "The mitten?" Rourke shrugged slightly. "You think I'm above sending a message?" he said. "Fear keeps men loyal. Keeps women obedient." Elise's hands clenched inside her coat. "Is that what you think I am?" she asked softly. Rourke leaned in. "You're the crack in Dominic's armor," he murmured. "And I break cracks." Behind them, movement shifted. Dominic had heard enough. But he didn't move, not yet, because Elise hadn't finished. Elise took one slow breath. "You miscalculated," she said. Rourke laughed under his breath. "Did I?" "Yes," Elise replied evenly. "Because you thought I was leverage." Rourke's smile lingered. "You are." Elise shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "I'm evidence." Rourke blinked. And in that split second of confusion, sirens, not blaring wildly, but approaching fast. Rourke's eyes snapped around. Dominic stepped forward from the crowd. Not with a gun, not with violence, with witnesses. "You talk too much," Dominic said coldly. Rourke's expression twisted. "You set me up?" Dominic's gaze didn't waver. "You set yourself up," he replied. Officers moved through the crowd swiftly, controlled, calm, efficient. Rourke's voice rose. "You think this ends anything?" Dominic stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It ends you hiding in the dark," he said. Rourke's eyes flicked toward Elise. "You think she'll stay?" Rourke sneered. "When she knows what you've done." Dominic didn't look away from Rourke. "She already does," he said quietly. Rourke froze. Elise stepped forward beside Dominic. "And I stayed," she added. That hit harder than any weapon. Rourke's confidence cracked. Because he understood something in that moment. Fear hadn't driven Elise. Choice had. Officers grabbed Rourke's arms, reading rights that sounded almost anticlimactic after everything. As they pulled him away, he spat one last venomous look at Dominic. "You think this makes you clean?" Dominic didn't answer. He simply turned away. Because this wasn't about cleaning his name. It was about stopping the rot. The sirens faded. The market slowly resumed its hum. Elise's legs felt weak, but she stood upright. Dominic looked at her like he couldn't quite believe what she'd done. "You were perfect," he murmured. Elise shook her head. "No," she said softly. "I was tired." Dominic exhaled something that sounded almost like a laugh. "You just ended a war," he said. Elise met his eyes. "No," she corrected gently. "You ended it when you chose not to kill him." Dominic's expression shifted. Because she was right. That was the real break in the cycle. Not violence. Restraint. The cabin didn't feel like exile anymore. It felt temporary. Dominic stood outside under the pale afternoon sun while federal agents loaded vehicles down the road. Cal approached quietly. "It's done," Cal said. Dominic nodded once. "You're walking away?" Cal asked carefully. Dominic didn't hesitate. "Yes." Cal blinked. "That's not who you've been." Dominic looked toward the cabin window where he could see Elise kneeling beside Benny, showing him how to fold paper into a crooked airplane. "That's exactly the point," Dominic replied. Inside, Mason stood near the doorway watching Elise and Benny. When Dominic entered, Mason didn't look away this time. "Is it over?" Mason asked. Dominic held his son's gaze. Yes. Mason's throat tightened. For real? For real. Mason nodded slowly, like he was letting himself believe it for the first time. Theo closed his book quietly. Lila stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Dominic's waist. He froze for a second, then held her carefully, like something fragile and precious. Elise stood and watched. Dominic looked at her over Lila's head. No words passed, but something settled between them. Not tension, not fear, peace. They returned to the mansion 2 weeks later. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt open. Dominic sold half of what tied him to the underground. Cut deals legally, transferred assets cleanly. He didn't pretend he'd never done wrong. He just stopped doing more. The garden Elise planted began to grow properly once spring truly arrived. Benny insisted on watering everything, even when it didn't need it. Theo started reading at the kitchen table without glancing at windows every 5 minutes. Lila let go of the cloth strip one afternoon and forgot where she'd left it. Mason stopped standing guard at doors. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the yard gold, Elise stood near the garden fence adjusting a loose post. Dominic walked up behind her quietly. You stayed, he said. Elise didn't turn yet. You gave me a reason to, she replied. Dominic stepped closer. I thought I bought you, he admitted quietly. Elise turned then, meeting his eyes. You paid a debt, she said gently. That's not the same thing. Dominic's voice softened. You weren't leverage. Elise smiled faintly. I know. Dominic stepped closer still, his hand brushing hers. You weren't a crack, he continued. Elise tilted her head. What was I? Dominic's voice dropped. You were the foundation. Elise's breath caught. In the yard, Benny shouted for Mason to kick a ball. Theo laughed quietly at something Lila said. Life. Normal. Loud. Dominic leaned down slowly, giving her time. This time, he kissed her properly. Not desperate. Not afraid. Just sure. Elise closed her eyes. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't surviving. She was choosing. And being chosen. Late summer. The garden was alive. Not perfectly symmetrical. Not luxury magazine beautiful. But alive in a way that mattered. Tomatoes hung heavy on the vine. Basil climbed the edges of the stone border. Sunlight spilled across the yard in slow golden waves. Elise stood barefoot in the grass. For a moment, she just listened. Not for danger. Not for footsteps. Not for engines in the distance. Just laughter. Benny was chasing Lila with a plastic watering can. Theo sat under the tree reading, occasionally glancing up to make sure no one needed him. Mason was teaching Dominic how to properly plant stakes without splitting the wood. Dominic was pretending not to need instructions. Elise smiled, and something hit her suddenly. No one was watching the road. No one was standing guard. No one was bracing for impact. Peace had arrived quietly. Dominic walked toward her, brushing dirt off his hands. You're thinking too hard again, he said softly. Elise exhaled. I'm just noticing. What? That no one looks scared anymore. Dominic followed her gaze. Mason laughed, a real laugh. Lila's hair was loose, not tied tight like armor. Theo had left his book face down in the grass. Benny tripped and popped back up without flinching. Dominic swallowed. I don't remember the last time it looked like this, he admitted. Elise looked at him. You built this, she said. Dominic shook his head slowly. No, he corrected. I stopped destroying it. That was the truth. Not redemption through violence. Redemption through restraint. Elise stepped closer. You didn't save me, she said gently. Dominic's eyes softened. You saved yourself, he replied. A small voice interrupted them. Miss Elise? They turned. Lila stood there, holding something behind her back. Yes? Elise asked. Lila stepped forward slowly, suddenly shy. We made something. Behind her, the boys appeared too. Theo holding nails. Mason holding a wooden plank. Benny holding nothing but pride. Dominic crouched slightly. What did you make? Mason lifted the plank. It was rough, uneven, carved imperfectly, but the letters were clear. Harper House. Elise froze. Her throat closed instantly. We thought. Theo began carefully. Since you stayed, and you didn't leave, Benny added. And you don't look scared anymore, Lila whispered. Mason finished it. You should have your name here. Silence swallowed the yard. Dominic looked at the sign. Then at Elise. And something in his expression shifted permanently. Not ownership. Not possession. Partnership. He stood and stepped beside her. What do you think? He asked quietly. Elise couldn't speak for a moment. She had once stood in a warehouse. Displayed. Priced. Measured. Called barren. Called useless. And now, 4 children waited for her approval like she was the center of their gravity. Elise nodded slowly. Yes, she whispered. Mason grinned. They hammered the sign into the fence together. Not Dominic alone. Not the children alone. All of them. When it was finished, Dominic stepped back and read it aloud softly. Harper House. Elise's breath trembled. You were never bought, Dominic said quietly, just for her. Elise looked at him. I know, she replied. And this time, she believed it. Dominic reached for her hand. She let him. The sun dipped lower. The garden swayed gently in the wind. No sirens. No threats. No debts. Just life. And for the first time, it was enough. If this story moved something inside you, if you've ever felt unseen, unwanted, or replaceable, remember this. Your worth is not decided by the worst room you've stood in. Sometimes the world calls you broken. And sometimes, you're just planted in the wrong soil. If you believe in second chances, press like. If you believe people can change, subscribe. And if you've ever chosen to stay when walking away would have been easier, tell us your story in the comments. Because here, we don't tell perfect stories. We tell real ones. And this is only the beginning.